In the cold, dim glow of the cavern, a tension far sharper than the freezing air settled over the monarchs. The frost that coated the walls could kill a human instantly, but for these beings, the true chill came not from the ice. It came from the news that had forced them together. Hwang, the frost monarch, had retreated here after barely escaping with its life. Now, it had summoned the monarchs still residing on Earth. One by one they arrived, their presence weighing heavily against the silence. Tarnak, monarch of the iron body; Yogimut, monarch of transfiguration; Rakin, monarch of beasts; and Koratia, monarch of plagues. Power radiated from them like a suffocating mist. Hwang spoke immediately, its voice slicing through the stillness. The shadow monarch has surfaced. Shock rippled through the chamber. Yogimut stepped forward, disbelief twisting across his face. According to everything they knew, it was impossible. No human vessel could contain the full force of the shadow monarch. It was the same reason even the Dragon King couldn't stay on the surface. But Hwang's expression left no room for doubt. It had seen him, and that was enough. With a grim, icy calm, the Frost Monarch confirmed the terrifying truth. The Shadow Monarch's power had fully awakened. He was more dangerous than any of them had anticipated, more dangerous even than the fragment of brilliant light. The oppressive tension tightened as Hwang continued. He proposed something reckless, something bold. They would strike now, before the Shadow Monarch's power could grow any further. If they acted quickly, while he still inhabited a human body, they might have a chance. His eyes swept across them, seeking even a flicker of support. Tarnak was the first to answer, his voice hard as metal. Attack him? That's suicide. Fighting one of the strongest among the 9 monarchs, especially with their current strength, was insanity. Better to wait for the monarch of destruction, the Dragon King, whose return would shift the balance. Frustration sparked in Hwang's eyes. Waiting felt like admitting defeat. They were monarchs, beings feared across worlds. Yet here they stood, clinging to the hope that the Dragon King might eventually intervene. No, this was their moment. Hwang insisted that striking now was their only path to victory. He swore to take responsibility for everything and promised that together they could erase the Shadow Monarch before it was too late. But Tarnak remained unmoved. He would not throw his life away. Yogimut followed with a tense shake of his head, remembering all too well the monarch of white flames, defeated, vanished, and likely lost to the Shadow Monarch's dreadful authority. Tarnak's voice echoed through the cavern as he reminded them of that fate. Any who fell before the Shadow Monarch risked being bound to him forever, forced into an eternal slumber, or worse, turned into one of his shadows. And so, despite Hwang's desperate plea, silence filled the cave once more, cold, heavy, and thick with fear. Rakin, the monarch of beasts, let out a low growl, the sound echoing off the icy walls. Cowards, he spat. He refused to believe that the Shadow Monarch could dominate monarchs in their true forms, let alone bend them into servants. But Tarnak shot him a sharp glare. You're underestimating him. The Shadow Monarch isn't acting alone. He's aligned with the administrator. The words sank into the cave like heavy stones. Even Rakin's bravado faltered. A partnership between the Shadow Monarch and the very being that enforced the world's rules. Such a union tipped the balance dangerously. Tarnak continued coldly, explaining that with such support, the Shadow Monarch could even reproduce their forms, turning them into mere replicas, pawns in his shadow army. That was enough for Yogimut and Tarnak. Without another word, portals opened behind them, swirling with otherworldly light. They stepped inside and vanished, leaving only 3 monarchs behind: Hwang, Rakin, and Koratia. Rakin turned, irritation boiling beneath his skin. You expect me to risk everything based on fear? Prove the Shadow Monarch is still bound by human weakness. Hwang responded by revealing a single object, the dagger Jinwoo had thrown during their confrontation. Its blade was stained with poison. Ashborn, the true Shadow Monarch, would never rely on such methods. He had no need for toxins or human tricks. This dagger was proof Jinwoo still retained fragments of his humanity. The vessel was not yet fully consumed. Horatio observed the blade with a twisted grin. Poison? How amusing. If the Shadow Monarch had complete control, he'd never resort to something so fragile. Her smile deepened. The idea that the vessel still had exploitable weaknesses seemed to delight her. Hachwan's gaze flickered between them. So, will you stand with me? Horatio spoke first, her voice dripping with malice. I will. A weakness like this is too tempting to ignore. Rockin clenched his jaw, muscles tightening beneath his bestial form. He wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially not one that promised glory. With a fierce grin, he nodded. Fine, I'll join you. If the Shadow Monarch falls, it will be by our hands. The pact was sealed. A confrontation with the Shadow Monarch was no longer a question. It was fate. Far from the hidden cave, a somber silence hung over the streets. Crowds gathered to honor President Go-Gunny. His memorial service drew people from all walks of life, each mourning the loss of a leader whose strength and compassion had shaped their world. Television networks halted their usual broadcasts, airing tributes that captured the magnitude of his influence. Clips rolled across the screens, moments of courage, speeches filled with conviction, and actions that defined his legacy. One powerful scene resurfaced. The day President Go publicly confronted Congressman Nam Jinwook. His voice, steady but urgent, had warned the nation of the true danger lurking behind S-rank gates. No amount of wealth can save you when such a calamity erupts, he had said, reminding the world why hunters were indispensable. Following the tribute, an interview with President Go's longtime doctor aired. The doctor recalled a deeply personal moment from the Jeju Island battle. As Jinwoo fought alone against the monstrous ant horde, President Go had spoken quietly, revealing that his lifelong wish had been granted. A wish fulfilled in the final days of his life. A leader gone, but never forgotten. President Go had spoken those final words, a confession of peace. He had fulfilled his purpose, and for the first time in decades, he felt he could rest. Yet the doctor, recalling that moment, struggled to accept that such serene words would soon be followed by the chairman's death. The broadcasts, the memories, the tributes, everything carried an overwhelming sense of loss. A nation mourned the departure of a man who had dedicated every breath of his life to protecting them. That night, atop the 100-story Daesung Tower, Sung Jinwoo stood alone. Wind roared past him, whipping around the skyscraper like a furious storm, but Jinwoo remained perfectly still, his sharp gaze slicing through the darkness as he surveyed the vast city below. He looked like a predator searching for the faintest trace of its prey. He focused, hunting for something, someone that kept slipping through his senses. His mind flashed back to his recent confrontation with the Frost Monarch. He had sensed no shadow following Hwang during their battle. The Monarch had been in his original form. And original forms, as the Monarch of Giants had told him, could never be pulled into the Shadow Army. That meant something dangerous. He could no longer track them. His most reliable method, the shadows, was useless against monarchs in their true forms. But Jinwoo's eyes glinted with cold determination. Even without that advantage, even without a single clue to follow, he was still a hunter, and hunters never fail to find their prey. Tonight, he would begin the hunt. The first monarch would fall. Meanwhile, across the city, a critical meeting was underway. Inside the main conference room of the Korean Hunters Association, over 30 high-ranking officials gathered, branch directors, department heads, and the vice president himself. The air was thick with unease. A week had passed since Chairman Go-Gunny's death, and the empty seat at the head of the association weighed heavily on all of them. The vice president addressed the room with a solemn voice. It was time to choose a successor. One of the directors spoke up, voicing the fear everyone shared. President Go had been an S-rank hunter. His presence alone had kept Korea's powerful guilds in check. Without him, who could maintain order? The vice president agreed that the balance had shifted, but insisted they couldn't simply recruit an outside S-rank hunter. Too much authority handed to an unfamiliar figure could fracture the association. After long deliberation, the vice president finally revealed the consensus reached by the board. Wu Jinchul, chief inspector of the Hunters Association. A hush swept through the room. Jinchul stared back, stunned. He had never imagined himself in the late chairman's place. He was young, not an S-rank hunter, and many others held far greater power. But the leaders disagreed. They reminded him that leadership wasn't measured only in rank. Jinchul's influence among hunters, his reputation for fairness, and his calm decision-making during crises made him the strongest candidate. He had something no one else possessed, a direct, trusted relationship with Korea's greatest weapon, Sung Jinwoo. And in this unstable era, influence over power mattered just as much as power itself. The room stood firm. Jinchul was the only one capable of holding Korea's hunter community together. Though still uncertain, he listened as the vice president spoke one last time. They would not force his decision, but they urged him, for the sake of the nation, for the memory of President Go, and for the future of every hunter, to consider the offer carefully. After a long moment of silence, Wu Jinchul finally nodded, accepting the immense weight placed upon his shoulders. The decision settled heavily in the air, but the leaders exhaled with relief. A new era for the Hunters Association had begun. That same night, darkness clung to the sky above the Scavenger Guild headquarters. Inside, the mood matched the gloom. Thomas Andre, the guild master himself, descended to the underground floors with Laura close behind. It had been ages since he last set foot down here, and the security staff stiffened the moment they saw him. His reputation carried power, fear even, but Thomas merely waved a hand. Relax. He stepped toward the biometric lock. A quiet beep, a flash of blue light. The steel door slid open smoothly. Laura followed him inside, her curiosity impossible to hide. Sir, are you seriously planning to give something from this vault? These aren't normal weapons. And she was right. This place housed treasures, legendary artifacts with power enough to shift the tide of a battlefield. Items even S-rank guilds would kill for. But Thomas remained firm. They entered the storage room, and before them stood the object of their visit, a glass case containing two impossibly rare daggers. Thomas paused in front of it, eyes filled with admiration. No matter how many times he saw them, he couldn't help but marvel. Perfect craftsmanship, lethal elegance, weapons forged for greatness. Laura shook her head. There are only two of these in the world, and probably will be for decades. Thomas exhaled, but his expression didn't change. Those daggers, these priceless treasures, were wasted sitting in darkness, rotting away in a vault when they could be shining in the hands of someone worthy, someone who could unlock their true power. His grin widened as the overhead lights reflected across the blades, making them shimmer like they were alive, almost as if they, too, were eager to be wielded again. His decision was final. Across Korea, the media exploded with breaking news. Wu Jinchul appointed new chairman of the Hunters Association. The shock of President Go Gunny's death still lingered, and the public had barely begun to come to terms with the loss. Now a new leader had risen, one many knew, but few expected. Wu Jinchul, renowned for his quiet strength and steady leadership, was widely praised, yet anxiety still rippled across the nation. The world felt more unstable than ever. At home, Jinho sat watching the report on TV. She crossed her arms, frowning thoughtfully. The world really has gone crazy, she muttered. First, the murder of the chairman. Now, the young, good-looking inspector suddenly leading the entire association. Nothing made sense anymore, and the unease in her chest refused to fade. Jinho glanced back toward the kitchen. Her mother, Kyung-hee, was washing dishes, humming softly. A mischievous smile spread across Jinho's face. She moved quietly, light on her feet like a stalking cat, and suddenly wrapped her arms around her mother from behind. Kyung-hee jumped slightly, then laughed. Ah, you scared me. Still smiling, she asked Jinho to take out the trash. Jinho immediately collapsed onto the nearest chair, groaning dramatically. No, I don't want to. Her laziness was almost an art form. But then, without warning, her expression shifted, more serious, almost troubled. Mom, let's move. Let's go somewhere else. Somewhere safer. Kyung-hee froze, caught off guard by the sudden suggestion. Move? From their apartment? This home carried years of memories. Warm, painful, ordinary, precious. She tried to lighten the moment. Well, before we move out of the country, can you at least bring the laundry from the washer? Gina sighed, defeated, and trudged toward her room to grab the laundry basket. Her thoughts lingered on the idea of moving, on danger, on change, on uncertainty. But when she lifted her eyes, she froze. The basket slipped from her hands and crashed onto the floor. Mom! Her voice trembled. Come here. Now. Outside the Ajin Guild office, a huge crowd had formed. The rumor spreading through the people was insane, unbelievable. Tomos Ondra, the Goliath of America. At Ajin Guild. Inside, Jinho was barely holding himself together. He stood stiffly, sweat trickling down his temples, trying not to panic. The strongest hunter in America, and Leonard Neerman, Germany's strongest, were sitting inside their tiny office. 2 hours had passed. 2 hours of unbearable tension. Jinho glanced at his silent phone for the 10th time. Where was Jinwoo? Why wasn't he answering? Even Leonard was stunned. Thomas Andre, was here to find Sung Jinwoo. The whole situation felt surreal. Laura sat calmly beside them, translating Thomas's comments. Based on Jinwoo's absence, she guessed he must be in the middle of a raid. Jinho nodded anxiously. That had to be it. He prayed his boss would come back soon, just as he considered calling again. The office doors slid open with a quiet hiss. Jinwoo stepped inside. Relief washed over Jinho so fast he practically leapt out of his seat. Boss, you're finally here. He looked like he might cry from stress and happiness. Jinwoo immediately felt the heavy aura in the room. His eyes met Thomas Andre's, who greeted him with a lazy wave that somehow carried overwhelming pressure. Jinwoo had sensed the unusual atmosphere the moment he reached the building. The crowd of reporters outside, the massive, unmistakable presence waiting for him. Thomas Andre was looking for him. Jinho rushed to him. Boss, why didn't you answer your phone? I called you so many times. I was busy, Jinwoo replied calmly. His outfit, torn and dirt-stained, said more than words. His mind briefly drifted to Baru and Igris. They were nearing another rank up. He needed to continue the hunt. There was no time to rest. Then Thomas rose to his feet. An enormous shadow fell across the room. He approached Jinwoo, his casual demeanor unable to hide the tension beneath it. Jinwoo braced himself, wondering if a fight might erupt then and there. Why are you in Korea? Jinwoo asked quietly. Thomas grinned. The promise we made, remember? A meal together once my arm healed. But then his tone shifted. I also brought you a gift. Something dangerous. Jinwoo raised an eyebrow. A dangerous gift? Jinho, listening nearby, paled. Was this a trap? A bomb? Before Jinwoo could question it further, Leonard finally stepped forward and introduced himself. Jinwoo guessed immediately. He probably wanted protection, a commission, something official. But Thomas cut him off, stepping in front of Leonard with a dismissive glare. Not today. This is classified. Leonard clenched his jaw. He had waited over 2 hours, humiliated, ignored. This treatment was new to him, and he hated it. Thomas didn't care. He simply motioned to Jinwoo. Let's go. Soon, the two hunters, along with their entourages, were seated around a private dinner table. Thomas had waited a long time for this moment. With a snap of his fingers, he signaled his bodyguards. The real meeting was about to begin. They immediately responded, stepping forward in perfect synchronization, and placed a thick, reinforced briefcase on the table. This, Thomas had hinted earlier, was the gift. Yet Jinwoo remained expressionless. He had no interest in money, equipment, or favors. There was nothing he particularly needed, but the moment the locks clicked open with a soft clack, Jinwoo's indifference shattered. His eyes widened. Inside the case lay 2 daggers, each driven into a massive, matte black scale. Even without touching them, Jinwoo instantly recognized the material. The aura, the pressure, the color. Kamish, the remains of the strongest dragon to ever appear on Earth. Thomas watched Jinwoo's reaction with a satisfied smirk. Oh, you recognized it that quickly? As expected. But Jinwoo didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the daggers, sleek, deadly, and overflowing with terrifying magical density. Kamish's corpse should have been locked away under the Hunter Bureau's absolute security. The world believed no piece of the dragon ever left their vault. Yet here, right in front of him, were weapons born from Kamish's fangs. Thomas leaned back, folding his arms casually. The U.S. government wanted to handle the corpse. Said cooperation might earn me something more valuable than money. So I let them. His tone lowered, carrying a hint of pride. But I kept one thing for myself. Kamish's largest canine tooth. A little souvenir from when he bit me during our fight. Jinwoo's brows raised slightly. Too short to forge a sword, yet too dense to waste. So Thomas had it carved into a pair of daggers. He motioned for Jinwoo to take them. Jinwoo reached out and gripped one dagger. The blade slid out of the scale like water flowing through a channel, a faint pulse of mana flaring around it. The weight was perfect, light but powerful. Alive. He checked the stats instinctively. Attack power exceeding 1,000. A number so high it nearly numbed his senses. The Demon King's daggers, once his prized tools, felt like toys in comparison. Holding these was no different from wielding a broadsword in each hand, except sharper, faster, deadlier. Magic surged faintly along the blade in response to Jinwoo's mana. A primal urge rose in him, to test it, to unleash it. The air thickened. Thomas felt the shift instantly and let out an awkward laugh. Hey now, careful with that. Even with my defense, that thing can skewer me like a shrimp. He squinted jokingly. You're not planning to stab me, right? Jinwoo blinked, snapped out of the trance, and slowly sheathed the dagger back into the scale. As the blade disappeared, the black aura dissolved, and an invisible pressure lifted from the room. Laura's shoulders sagged with relief. Even the bodyguards in the back, trained elites of the Scavenger Guild, exhaled quietly, tension melting off their faces. Thomas glanced at Laura as if asking, "Still think I made the wrong choice bringing these?" She shook her head respectfully. "No, it was the right decision, sir." Thomas nodded, then turned back to Jinwoo with a grin. "So, what do you think? Not bad for a thank you gift, right?" Jinwoo looked at the daggers once more, disbelief still evident in his eyes. "These are too much. Are you sure I can accept something like this?" Thomas leaned forward, his expression turning sincere. "You saved my life, and the lives of every one of my guild members." He tapped the case gently. "After that, this is nothing. Consider it settling a debt I don't like carrying." Jinwoo finally accepted the gift, offering a sincere word of thanks. The quiet spark of satisfaction in his eyes brought an unexpected warmth to Thomas's expression as well. For a brief moment, the room felt calm. Two warriors sharing a rare instance of peace in lives defined by chaos. That moment didn't last. Both men froze at the exact same instant. A violent surge of mana hit their senses like a tidal wave. Thomas's jaw tightened. "You felt that too?" Jinwoo's curt nod was all the confirmation he needed. Chairs scraped back sharply as the two hunters moved in perfect sync, racing toward the nearest window. Outside, Seoul had fallen disturbingly silent. People stood motionless in the streets, phones in hand, bags half-dropped, conversations cut off mid-sentence. Their faces were pale, their bodies stiff, all of them staring upward with expressions of disbelief and fear. Jinwoo followed their line of sight. There was a gate, but not a normal one, not even close. It dominated the sky like a colossal wound in reality, its edges flickering with unstable magic. The thing radiated power so immense that Jinwoo felt it reverberate inside his bones. He had seen countless gates before, but nothing like this. Thomas exhaled a shaky breath. This is impossible. It's bigger than Kamish's gate. Much bigger. To someone who had fought a dragon that shook continents, Admitting fear meant the situation was beyond comprehension. The world itself felt like it was slipping out of the realm of logic and into something far more dangerous. The giant gate trembled, almost alive, like a creature preparing to swallow the city whole. Below it, crowds began to gather. Despite knowing that a new gate wouldn't break instantly, curiosity overpowered caution. People snapped photos, recorded videos, and whispered nervously. Foreign reporters had already arrived, broadcasting the surreal scene. Nick Powell from BBN News stood front and center, microphone in hand, his voice steady but tense as he reported live. A gate of unprecedented size has appeared above Seoul. Locals are both mesmerized and terrified. Though the crowd remains calm for now, there's a deep sense of unease. Something about this gate is different. He ended the coverage with a grim tone and signed off. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Dr. Belzer, one of the foremost experts on magical phenomena, addressed the press. He had warned for days about a disturbing buildup of mana over Seoul. Now, his prediction had materialized. And according to him, this was only the beginning. When asked whether similar gates could form in other countries, he didn't hesitate. Yes, without question. The room went silent. The reporter pressed on, asking what the most reasonable course of action would be in a situation like this. Dr. Belzer looked down for a long moment, the fatigue in his eyes unmistakable. "I wish I had an answer," he murmured. "At this point, all we can do is pray that this does not end in catastrophe." His words hung in the air like a funeral bell, deepening the growing sense of dread.